This year we did, as Deborah mentioned and June have mentioned, Action Seed Funds, Innovation Seed Funds. And what that began was as a $25,000 fund. And we wanted to, our goal was to make an impact and a change for people of color working in the racial equity field. And we did not want to do it as a top-down, where we say what we thought, and because that wouldn't have allowed the innovation to happen from the ground and from people that are actually doing the work. And so what we did is we engaged our network. We made it a very open process, and many people were able to be engaged through that process. I think the total tally is over 500 people were engaged in that whole process.
Can you talk a little bit about how?
Yeah, so the first step was we recruited a selection committee, which was about 20 people or so that came in, and they were the ones that really drafted the guidelines and eligibility for the projects and kind of set the container of what, together we thought the seed fund should do and have flexibility to do. But it was a very open process to the extent that we also wanted it to be very easy to apply to it. And so in the end, the questions, there were only 5 questions, and it was maybe 2 pages long to apply. It was a very short application. It wasn't supposed to take much time. And the application was only open for about 3 weeks. And during that time, So that was a selection committee. Then we kicked off the process with a webinar, which was, again, open and public, and people were able to ask questions and answer, get their answers. And that's also the day when the application opened. And then from there, the applications were supposed to be partnerships. So that was part of the innovation process. We didn't want, just one organization to apply for staff time, for instance, but rather that people really partnered and tried to think of how that staff time could be innovative in creating racial equity for the field. And we also wanted folks to be able to share what they were learning through this process with everyone in the field. And so there's very much a lot of communication that's happening and learning that we're doing from each other. And then we received 135 applications. Each one of those applications, like I said, had to have at least 3 team members. Some of them had more. And then from that, we also went back to the network and said, we need to review these 135 applications. And we had an additional 128 people that came in through a network way to be able to say, I'm able to review 10 applications. Some people were able to review 1, some people 2. And at the end, the applications were reviewed by at least 2 or 3 different people. 2 community people that were in the recruiting process, and then a person from the selection committee. And then there was a community grades that happen, and after you were reviewing it, you were putting in a score for each application, and those scores were then taken, and we were able to, with the selection committee, to make a decision. And I see Allison's here. She was part of our selection committee, so she can talk more about what that process felt like on the other side. But we then came up with these 3 final projects that we felt were going to be very strong and creating one, not just experiments and innovation on the field of racial equity, but also be able to bring back lessons and, that we'd be able to learn together. And those projects kicked off in April, and the funding goes on till December. And so from April to December, we are hosting 4 communities of practice. We're about to do our second one next week, where the projects that were selected come together and meet with a coach that, they're able to bring up the challenges that they're facing, some of the interesting connections that they feel like they're doing, and even though they're in separate places, learning from each other. And then those lessons, bringing them back to the field and sharing them. And when their project is done, they're going to be presenting their process to everyone in our network, again, publicly and very openly. One of the interesting things that we found that I don't think we expected when we went in was that all three projects, although they're in different locations and they had never met, and this was the first time they were talking in the first community practice session, they all stressed actually how much Islamophobia was affecting their work, even though it might not have been directly related to their work. And so that became a point of conversation and of connection, and that we would have never realized had we not come into that space and talked about it. It for some of them, it was, it was a main part of their work. For others, it wasn't, and it was just affecting their personal lives. And so, it was really an interesting connection that we hadn't expected to come of that, and to be able to heal together from that and support them to keep the work going forward.
Beautiful. I think an interesting thing, that variation that you brought up, is that a collaborative project doesn't just mean 5 people meeting together over time. It can grow to include a lot more people and then shrink down for some work and grow and expand. So I think that's a really neat aspect, how many people you were able to are now really part of the network that's going to, it's like you're creating your network for a spread of what you learn.